Good morning, everyone. My name is Mauro Mortali, Senior Manager, Strategy and Innovation, and welcome to our brand new event series brought to you by BT Skills for Tomorrow. So the whole point of BT Skills for Tomorrow is to empower businesses and their employees with the digital skills that you need to help grow your business. And I'm sure we'll all agree that the current COVID-19 situation is really accelerating the need for these skills. So we're running a series of online courses to help SME owners and their employees like you to improve your digital skills through access to new online tools, social media advice, and new digital tips and tricks, which will hopefully empower you with the skills you need during these challenging times. So please do check out the wealth of resources and upcoming courses that there are on the BT Skills for Tomorrow website. But before I launch into my session, I'd like to introduce you to Karenza Jennings, who's our Director of Digital Impact and Sustainability at BT, and also the leader for the Skills for Tomorrow program, bringing these free sessions to you. So let's hear a pre-recorded message from Karenza.
Hello and welcome to BT Skills for Tomorrow. My name's Karenza Jennings and I'm BT's Digital Impact Director. I run Skills for Tomorrow. We actually set up the programme a few months ago and it's designed to help communities all over the UK in different ways to develop their confidence online and to develop their digital skills. Now more than ever with COVID-19, it's really important that we're here to support you. We want to help you develop your confidence. We want you to help you reach your digital routes to market. We want you to help promote your products and services to your customers, and we really want you to succeed. We've put together this program of webinars which are completely free for you and for your co-workers. We want to help inspire you to start using some of the collaboration tools that will genuinely help you save time and money and help you get your routes to market quicker. It's really important that you feel confident with digital tools and that you're able to communicate with your co-workers really effectively. Working remotely is a challenge for all of us. I'm working from home right now. It's a challenge for absolutely all of us. And you just have to adapt. You have to adapt really quickly and turn to valuable advice where you can get it. We've been talking to a huge number of small businesses ourselves through our partners, Small Business Britain, and also Google Digital Garage. We've been listening to the way that people are facing all kinds of different challenges and problems at the moment. We're trying to respond rapidly with the types of help, advice and support that we feel is most useful to you. So we're starting with some key tools around collaboration, digital marketing, and also how to optimize your business model. We want to help you take your business online so that you can discover your customers and that they can discover you. It's really important as well that you open up communication channels with your customers. Now more than ever, it's the human side of business. That's what matters, and that's what we're trying to help you do. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to #Skills for Tomorrow. I really hope that you learn something valuable. I hope you learn some good top tips, and I hope you tell others about us. We're here to help you. It's BT Skills for Tomorrow. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can all see and hear okay. So I could ask you to turn off your microphones and cameras, and if you've got any problems, just flag them in the instant chat box. There will be time at the end of the session for me to answer any questions from you that you may have, so please add them to the instant chat box as we sort of go along. And also, please do tweet about this seminar using the Skills for Tomorrow hashtag. In particular, we would love to see pictures of yourselves watching the webinar, so do get posting. And if you tag at BT Business, we may even use the best photo to get a retweet from the channel. So just looking at some of the where you're all sort of tuning in from, so I can see we've got people from Harrogate, Bournemouth, Paris, which is fantastic, and Armenia. So our spread is greater than the UK, which is sort of fantastic to see. So just a little bit about myself before I sort of take you through sort of the material. So as I say, my name is Mauro Mortali. Now, often that when people see my name and then I start to speak, that kind of leads to some disappointment because the name is clearly from Italy. So a lot of time people expect me to come on and speak with a sort of deep Italian accent. So I do apologise if that is the case, but my parents are originally from Italy. I often get asked, which is the really important question is, who do I support in the football, Italy or England? And for most of my life, I've always supported Italy, mainly because Italy's had the best chance of winning the World Cup. But that kind of fell flat on its face sort of 2 years ago at the last World Cup because Italy didn't qualify and England did. I'm also a very big Liverpool fan, which isn't great at the moment from a COVID-19 perspective, because obviously the kind of football's been put on hold. And I'm also a very keen cyclist. So you can see that top picture there is from this sort of time last year up in the Lake District. So this year, as a result of COVID-19, one of the great things actually that's kind of about is that we've been able to kind of do kind of virtual cycling. So the bottom picture you see there actually is a screenshot from last week when a bunch of us were able to ride with the former Tour de France winner, Geraint Thomas, and a thing that he was doing for the NHS. So, you know, there have been kind of some positives. So my role at BT, so I run an innovation program within enterprise, and its main focus is really identifying kind of new technologies, and then looking to understand which of those technologies could potentially deliver most value for BT, and proving or disproving that value by running sorry, just go back a slide, by proving or disproving the value of that kind of particular capability. And we do that by actually running a kind of trial of that. So typically, there's always been inherent uncertainty in the technologies that we've been looking at. So things like, for example, artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality. So we've used test and trialing within BT to, as I say, to kind of remove uncertainty from the almost like the immaturity of the technology that we've been kind of looking at. So, and when I've done these types of kind of talks in the past, it is always in that kind of context. I have to say, I never thought I'd be doing a talk where we'd be looking to apply those same sorts of principles to deal with the uncertainty that's kind of resulting from the current sort of pandemic situation. So what I wanted to kind of do today really is share with you some of the kind of practical tools and frameworks that I've come across and I use in my kind of day job, which I hope you will find useful for navigating these difficult and uncertain times. And I've drawn on insight from a lot of sources during my time, lots of companies, including obviously all the great people here at BT, but also some of the leading thinkers in the entrepreneurship space, such as Eric Ries, Steve Blank, and Alex Osterwell. And there's tons of stuff online that you can sort of find you know, about these people, about the tools that they've kind of developed, which is most of which is free as well. But what these gurus of mine all have in common is that they stress the importance of testing and learning to develop the best possible offering or value proposition, as we'll call it, for their customers. So I'll talk about some of the techniques I've used for idea generation, so that, you know, making sure that you start with the customer. And then I'll explain why it's so important that you continually test those ideas with your customers, get feedback, and iterate your value proposition. So you might be thinking, you know, why does someone who works for an established company like BT kind of talk about entrepreneurship thinking? And it's quite simply because markets are moving so quickly that even the largest companies need to think like startups to be able to respond, keep up and respond very quickly to what's happening, and particularly at the moment to sort of navigate that uncertainty. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate the importance of experimentation, of test and learn, by telling a little bit of a story. So Jerry Uelsmann is an American photographer, quite famous for photo montage. So that picture, that photo you can see on the right hand side, was done way before Adobe Photoshop. But he was also a professor at the University of Florida. And at the start of one of his classes, he stood in front of his students and announced that the class would be split into two. So on the left-hand side of the studio, the quantity group of students would be graded solely on the quantity of the work that they produced. So the more photos they submitted, the higher their grade. And on the right-hand side of the studio, the second quality group of students would be graded solely on the quality of the work that they produced. So unlike the quantity group, these students were only required to submit one nearly perfect image to get an A. So at the end of the term, it was when graded the students in both the quantity and the quality group, and the results were astonishing because the best photos were all produced by the first group that was being graded for quantity. So as he looked into the reasons for these unusual findings, the facts emerged that whilst the quantity group of students were busy taking photos, learning from their mistakes and improving the quality of the photos on an iterative basis, the quality group sat around pondering on how to create the perfect picture and then procrastinated on taking action, and in the end produced mediocre photos. So how do we apply this principle of test and learn in what we do? So what you can see here is the process that we follow from ideation to experimentation and to launch. And you'll see that it draws upon these methodologies from the worlds of design thinking and lean startup. So for the purpose of today, I'm only going to focus on the first two steps because the launch process is different in different companies, but the first two steps, actually should be the same. What's really critical here is to acknowledge the importance of validated learning around your offering, your value proposition. So when you define a new offering, you'll need to make some assumptions about it, obviously. And the most important of these is typically, will my customers actually pay for this? So it's so important that you test these core assumptions before you get too far. Why? Because the simple principle is the more you test and validate those assumptions, the more you will reduce uncertainty and risk, and therefore the greater the chances of success. So the first tool I'm going to talk about is the value proposition canvas from Strategizer. Now this can be used either to help you to come up with new offerings or new value propositions, or to evaluate the customer centricity of your existing ones. Now, I've always found it slightly odd that in this framework, the customer part is on the right-hand side, and it's actually the part that you start with. So I've never quite understood why they don't put it on the left, but anyway. But what's really great and really powerful about this tool is that it forces you to think about your customer. And in particular, you have to put yourselves in your customer's shoes. And you can either do that by kind of empathy or doing research, or ideally a bit of both. And the key question you need to start asking yourself is, what are the jobs that my customer are trying to get done? And you need to try and be as kind of specific as possible. So let's take the example of a small local shop and your customer is the owner of the shop. What are the jobs that customer is looking to get done? So it could be order goods, sell goods, identify customer needs, manage inventory, market their store, get customers into the store. And then the next two key questions to ask yourself are, well, what are the gains that they are looking to create when doing those jobs? And what are the pains that they are looking to avoid, again, when doing those jobs? Perhaps in this context, the gains they're looking for are a stronger relationships with their customers, to be able to have the right products in stocks that their customers want. Perhaps the pains they want to avoid are losses due to undisposed items, or too wide an offering, which has high associated costs with this. So typically, you would perhaps do this in a sort of kind of workshop environment, or in a room where you get some relevant people together. You'd have it printed out, and you'd use sort of post-it notes to kind of stick things on the board. And clearly, in these days of times of social distancing, that's a bit more challenging to do on a face-to-face basis. But there are these days, loads of really good whiteboard collaboration tools like Microsoft Whiteboard or Miro that you can use. So when you've completed that exercise on your customers, then you start to think about what your value proposition could be, and how does that value proposition help customers get their job done. So let's say that I'm a small software company and I am developing a customer relationship solution that I think would be good for small shops. The key questions I therefore then need to answer are, how could or how does my product, or do my products and services help my customer create gains? And how could my products and services help that customer avoid or relieve pains? So if we look at this next slide, there's a bit of a kind of filled up example for Cute CRM, which I've stolen from sort of Scrum Desk as an idea. And I've touched upon already the customer's jobs to be done, the gains and the pains earlier. And you can see which gains are created by Cute CRM. A gift for you, and the pains relieved. Information about customers' shopping history, which informs what they might want to buy next. But then what this enables you to do, as you've done that exercise, is actually map the needs against your value proposition and see what the fit is between the two. Then hopefully that gives you more confidence in your offer, or less, as the case may be. And also then becomes something that helps you with marketing, because you'll be thinking about and espousing the benefits of your offering, not just the features. But I have to say, when we've done it, this is a really, really difficult exercise to do, because the temptation is, when you're doing that kind of customer needs part, is to think about your own products and services and see things purely through that particular lens and the features that you have, rather than thinking, as I say, about jobs to be done, pains and gains. And also, it's quite easy to kind of be quite generic. So the more specific you can get, the more kind of value that you'll sort of get from this. Now, one of the things I've struggled personally with in the past is idea generation. I've never seen myself particularly as a creative person, but what I have learned is that if you have the right tools, anyone can come up with ideas. And what's been key for me is to kind of work with these sort of four principles. So attitude really is everything when it comes to kind of brainstorming and idea generation. So you have to, wherever possible, try and ignore the past, and so approach things with a kind of fresh mindset. Leave ego at the door, so to forget about what you know, and create a safe space for idea generation. Where you have more of a mindset of yes and rather than kind of yes but. But I think there's two things that really stood out and were almost like game changers for me was actually, and this is back to the point that we were talking about earlier around the kind of the photography story, it's quantity at this stage rather than quality of ideas that are important. So you start kind of big, and then as you see, you work through a process of prioritizing those, but don't get too hung up on coming up with the best, one or two ideas. Go kind of for volume. And then the other kind of really important kind of facet here is, we talk a lot about the importance of thinking outside the box. It's an often used phrase, and I think it's massively overrated. What you should be doing is thinking inside the box, because by applying constraints often can help generate some of the most kind of creative ideas. And the most obvious constraint to use is time, for example. So rather than giving yourself, half an hour to come up with a bunch of kind of new ideas, give yourself 5 minutes or 10 minutes. The time pressure can actually sort of unlock a lot of those sort of creative juices. But then there are other constraints that you might want to sort of put around it in terms of, kind of scope, for example. And then in terms of actual practical ways of stimulating yourself to come up with sort of new ideas, there are loads out there that you can kind of find online. So I've listed 3 here as examples, which are sort of quite different. So one is pictures platforms, where you use visual stimuli to rather than verbal stimuli to get your creative juices flowing. And there, you're using pictures really as a springboard to get to new ideas. And those pictures can come from any source, magazines, screen grabs, comic books, newspapers, books, photos. And actually, the more variety you have is the better, because then that will, again, take you potentially in kind of different directions. Another technique is using exaggeration and deprivation, where you perhaps pick one of the benefits of your product or your service, and you push it to extremes by exaggerating what that benefit could be. Does that hyperbole lead to somewhere interesting? What if you were able to kind of deliver 100 times of the benefit? What would that look like? What if you gave your product away for free? How else would you make money? If you look at kind of Google, for example, they give away their search product for free, but they make their money through the kind of AdWords. So it's more about the kind of process that you go through and the type of thinking that this kind of helps generate. And then on the kind of deprivation side, ask yourselves, well, imagine if the users were deprived of the product completely. Does that kind of lead to a new way of sort of expressing its value? Now, my personal favorite, though, is what we've got there on the left-hand side, which is sometimes called Crazy Eights. And the idea here is you view what your challenge that you're looking at through the eyes of up to 8 well-known companies or well-known people. So you try and actually put yourselves in their shoes and ask yourself, what would ... do? So the 8 that I tend to kind of look at, which I think is quite helpful, is what would Apple do? How would Apple approach that particular sort of opportunity or challenge? What would Disney do? What would IKEA do? What would Amazon do? What would Elon Musk do? What would a government do? What would Richard Branson do? So there are, and because you're kind of, I suppose, putting yourself in the mindset of companies or people with different qualities or different attributes, it can actually help, as I say, take you in kind of all sorts of directions. I mean, I attended a design thinking training some time ago where we went through a lot of this sort of process, and the team that I was with was tasked with looking at how do we reimagine the on-the-go retail experience. And within sort of an hour, we'd come up with a new proposition around. It was kind of bringing together a kind of Tinder and foodies. So the idea being that people could go out and kind of use social to connect with people they didn't know and have kind of share their lunch and what have you. But the point was, it was generated in like an hour, and we did that by kind of, as I say, going through this sort of process. And if you get to a point where you've got a bunch of ideas, and obviously it's better to do this if there's more than one of you, because obviously you kind of play off each other, and that kind of sparks more kind of creativity. But then it's a case of you've got the big funnel of ideas. How do you then prioritize which ones you might you might find most interesting? And there's a very simple process that you may have heard of called dotmocracy, where whoever's taking part in this process are given a number of dots, 3, for example, literal dots being literally stickers, and they go around and allocate what they think are the ideas that they most like, and then that kind of gives you a sort of instant kind of democracy on which ideas you're most likely to kind of progress. So that's the kind of ideation side of things. So how you actually come up with ideas, how do you design with the customer in mind. But to close the loop on that, it's so important then that we look at how we experiment and sort of test those ideas. And this is where we use the build, measure, learn, validated learning cycle that's kind of sort of made famous by Eric Ries in the Lean Startup methodology. And ideally, you actually want to go through this loop as fast and as often as possible. So you've got your idea. So important to identify those core assumptions that need to be true for the value proposition to be successful, particularly the riskiest assumptions within what you're trying to do. Because as I've said before, the more you test and validate those assumptions, the more you reduce uncertainty and risk, and the greater the chances of success. And then from that, you build either a prototype, and we can talk about the different types of prototypes in a second, or what's often called a minimum viable proposition, which is the kind of stripped back to its bare essentials version of what you're trying to do. And you actually go and test it with customers, talk to customers, share it with customers, and gather as much feedback as possible. And then based on that feedback, you iterate the proposition or the prototype based on that learning, and you test again. And what's very powerful about this process is that it allows you to distinguish between value and waste features. So what are the features of your value proposition that are genuinely valuable to customers? And you know that because your customers are telling you that, and which ones are not. And you may come to a point in the cycle where you have to decide what's called, you persevere or you pivot. So do you continue with, the approach with the proposition, or do you kind of pivot and think, actually, I've got some assets that I can potentially repurpose and use elsewhere? And I think that pivoting bit is probably one of the hardest things you can do, because by this point, you're already quite wedded to, what it is that you're looking to develop. So to actually change direction slightly or completely can be quite difficult to get around. And interestingly, I found out the other day that Groupon, who I'm sure we're all aware of as a kind of vouchers website, actually started off as a kind of activist website, bizarrely enough, and clearly that didn't go very far, so they pivoted to becoming a vouchers website. That's about as far away from activism, feels as far away from vouchers as you can possibly get. So one of the things you're probably now thinking is, okay, that sounds interesting, running an experiment, what does that actually mean in practice? How do I actually run an experiment? How do I test those assumptions? Well, the great news is that there are loads of ways that you can do that. So I've listed here a bunch which I've taken from Strategizer's Testing Business Ideas book, which has a total of 44 different experiments to choose from, explaining what type of experiments you may want to run to achieve a specific goal. Now, they could be experiments that you want to run from in terms of trying to gauge interest in an idea. Perhaps it's to discuss an actual prototype that you developed, or even watching how customers interact with a prototype, through to running a simulation actually with a customer. So Wizard of Oz is one of my favorites, as obviously you'll be familiar with the film, where the wizard is actually a man behind a curtain. And in this world, this is where a customer interacts with something that, to all intents and purposes, to them feels real and automated, but actually you may have someone behind the scenes, pulling the levers to make it look real. Now, just going back to that example that I mentioned earlier on around the kind of design thinking training that we did and the sort of Tinder kind of for foodies idea that the team and I worked on together. We actually then built a prototype out of Lego, which was just had some characters eating food in a kind of park, and we went out on the streets. We went out around London and with our thing of Lego and just approach people and ask them to talk them through the kind of proposition that we were thinking about and got kind of feedback that way. Now, in today's climate, it's obviously very unlikely that you'll be able to run any experiments in persons. So digital approaches are extremely valid. So you can look to run an email campaign. You can use social channels, or you could create a landing page on a website with a call to action. Tend to be very, very effective. So I was talking with a training company a little while ago about an experiment they'd done in this particular space. They were thinking about developing a training course on the agile software development methodology. So what they actually did in terms of testing demand for that before they'd actually created anything is they created a landing page on their website with what they thought would be the interesting course contents, and the call to action for customers was for them to register their interest. So when they saw they had enough positive responses from customers, they were then able to justify developing the course. So just to show that that isn't just theory, that we've applied these same considerations within enterprise in BT, just wanted to kind of, I suppose, finish by talking about some of the things we've done in my area. So what you can see on this slide is the innovation pipeline that we have been kind of working with over the last couple of years. So we've moved from looking at over 100 different types of really interesting capabilities, evaluated them. Of those, we've ended up running sort of in excess of 30 experiments, and then of those 30 experiments, we've seen over sort of 10 actually move to kind of getting approved as business cases within the organization. There's a few I wanted to kind of call out here, which is the kind of first one on that list of the highlights, which we wanted to test customer appetite for a premium installation service. And in the past, what we may have just done is run a focus group and just ask customers about it and what they thought, and use that feedback to help define the proposition. And we did that, and that gave us a sort of good starter for 10. But we went further. In addition, we actually then created what we thought those services were, what services we thought the customer might value when having their broadband installed. And these are things like connecting devices to Wi-Fi, fixing any wiring issues the customer may have on their own sort of domain, positioning the router to have optimum effect, setting up any applications that they may have sort of purchased. And the way that we actually did the testing was, once a customer had ordered broadband, we rang them up to say, would you like us to come? Would you like to take part in this sort of project where we're evaluating a new service that we're designing? Could we send an engineer out to your site to install the service, and then we'll carry out different services for you, whatever you need. And the quid pro quo was that the customer would just provide us with feedback on what we carried out. So the combination of their feedback from what the customer told us, in terms of their satisfaction, in terms of where they saw the perceived value of what we delivered, combined with the actual data from the engineers themselves on what they had done, and the impact that had on the customer. So were we able to affect a speed change, as a result of positioning the router in one place versus the other, gave us so much richness in our proposition design as to what was really valuable from a customer perspective and what was less so. So it just meant that we could prioritize all the right elements. We had a set of assumptions, we tested them, we learned from them, and as a consequence, we're going to sort of be able to kind of build a better service as a result. And then, so we are kind of living this in BT now. We have a design thinking practice within the organization. you know, the organization is becoming, we're seeing innovation move from being something that has historically been within, you know, kind of research and development to kind of being diffused and democratized throughout the organization as a whole. And the other example, just to kind of call out here, I mean, as I say, there are things that we've done there around, you know, how we've used kind of technology to kind of drive performance improvements. But we've also quite recently been working with a major retailer on, well, where we started actually was a discussion around where their kind of key issues and the key areas that the challenges that they were facing, the areas that we're looking to move into. And this is all pre-COVID-19, and working through this same type of methodology. We ended up co-creating, you know, potential new proposition with a customer where, you know, we could use things like artificial intelligence and visual analytics to count the number of deliveries coming in to a pallet into the distribution center. So it's not a proposition we would necessarily have started with, because you know, we would have been designing in a vacuum. That has come from that kind of co-creation activity, from those sort of, from actually engaging with that particular customer really early on and sort of bring them into our sort of process really. So just to kind of sort of summarize and allow time for questions at the end, I would say that, you know, in these uncertain times, it is even more important to be using test and learn principles to get to that sort of validated learning. So as I said at the start, you know, with this really came about, this work that we've been doing in particularly in my area in BT, as a consequence of trying to navigate the uncertainty from new technologies such as things like artificial intelligence, you know, robotics, process automation, and those sorts of things. But actually, you know, those same kind of principles are even more important now as you try and work out, you know, the consequences of what's happening with COVID-19. What has changed? How can I put myself in my kind of customers' sort of shoes, and how can I sort of test those core assumptions in our products and services so that we can reduce that uncertainty? And, you know, it's only through using that kind of semi-scientific approach of going through the loop that we talked about that you can kind of, you know, identify those assumptions, build a hypothesis, and then kind of test to see if that actually makes sense. So hopefully, you know, I've showed you some frameworks that, you know, that we use, such as the value proposition canvas, which will force you into actually thinking about your customers, the jobs they're trying to get done, and how your products and services can create value by helping customers achieve pains and gains, and achieve gains or avoid pains. As I said, that also helps from a kind of marketing perspective in terms of, you know, understanding what the benefits of what you offer are. And then, you know, when it comes to coming up with new ideas, you know, I reiterate the point that, you know, quantity of ideas matters much more than quality in those sort of initial phases. And, you know, we looked at 3 different ways that we can come up with new ideas. So we talked about crazy eights, picture platforms, exaggeration, deprivation, but there are many others. And then from your chosen idea, you know, you need to identify those core assumptions, which I know I keep reiterating this, that need to be true for the value proposition to be successful. And then you test these with your customers via, you know, either a prototype, and it can be something very simple as we saw earlier on, or an actual minimum viable proposition or product. But the emphasis being on feedback and learning and iterating what you're sort of developing. And, you know, we saw there are many different types of experiments that you can run depending on what you're trying to achieve. I mean, it's clear that you need to be, it's important that you're clear on what your hypothesis is. But the thing I would say is, you know, there are loads of resources available online. So everything that I've kind of taken you through here, you can Google it. You can Google value proposition canvas. You can Google, you know, the experiments. You can Google business model canvas, which is another thing that strategizers do. You know, the work that Eric Rees and Steve Blank have done kind of on entrepreneurship. Again, there's a lot of kind of practical material within that you can kind of use to, you know, kind of help you navigate these sorts of times, really. So I think just to kind of wrap up, I just wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts. So the first being from Mr. Telecommunications himself, Alexander Graham Bell. When one door closes, another opens. We often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the one which is opened for us. And then finally from C.S. Lewis, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And what I hope is that what we've kind of walked through today, that some of those kind of tools and techniques that we've sort of shared will kind of help you in this particular sort of space, really. So so I hope you find that useful. I'm going to look to see what questions we've got on the Q&A to review and come back to you on. If while I'm doing that, if I could ask you to complete the feedback form link, which hopefully will be put on the screen any minute now, which will obviously then help us improve these webinars. And obviously you're very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. There is only one Mauro Mortali in the world, I think. So happy to kind of take any conversations with yourselves kind of offline. So let's see. I'll look at the questions. Well, hopefully you'll do the survey. Okay, so the main question is, will there be an opportunity to access these keynotes? Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to get put on YouTube, I think, as a video. But I'm sure I'm sure the materials can be made available. I don't think there's anything particularly sort of kind of confidential in there. What is the relationship of the process you've described with psychology? So that's a great question, actually. I think there's a lot of psychology in this, particularly in the kind of the idea generation. As I say, I think we've kind of spent we've almost been conditioned to, let's say, be thinking about outside of think outside of the box is the classic one. And actually, as say, constraints are a really sort of powerful way of kind of getting you to kind of be much more creative. So yeah, no, I think there's definitely a kind of strong psychological bent to some of this stuff. But as I say, I think the one sort of takeaway I think you absolutely should have is just ask customers about what it is you're looking to kind of develop. We are finding that we have customers who when we approach them and say look, we're looking to develop a new service offering, can we work with you on doing that? Customers are often quite happy to do that because it gives them the feeling that they're contributing to something as a consequence of it, really. So yeah, I'd say it doesn't hurt just to sort of take a prototype and but as I say, the access to digital channels now, it makes it a lot easier to be able to kind of reach an audience and get that feedback. Got another question. Can I repeat my surname? Mortali, Mortali, or Mortal with an I. It's often easier to remember. But yes, please do kind of connect with me on LinkedIn. It's great for a multinational with layers and lots of resource. Can you please advise which parts you would recommend for self-employed? I mean, I think it's. I think a lot of this, the kind of thinking here, a lot of the material actually is drawn from research and entrepreneurship, actually, and the startup world. So, I think if anything, it's even more important for kind of companies starting up to follow these sorts of principles, because you don't want to sort of get sort of too far down a path and realize that you placed the wrong bet, or actually customers aren't actually as kind of keen on your product as you first thought. So the sooner you can start to kind of validate those as assumptions that you kind of develop, the better, really. As I say, I think in a larger company you've got the ability to kind of to take almost a bit more risk, because you've got those resources that you kind of called out there to kind of fall back on. I think in a smaller company, or even the self-employed, I guess from a self-employed perspective, the challenge if you're on your own is that some of these processes work better in terms of particularly that sort of idea generation exercise if you've got someone to kind of bounce ideas off. So I would suggest you try and don't do that on your own, because you'll obviously be quite limited. When doing research, you involve a limited number of people in the research. As a result, some business stakeholders consider this might not be enough to prove the how many people should be involved. Yes, the classic question of sample size is often the one that's kind of bandied around to stop you from doing things. You know, I think I'm not a research specialist, so I couldn't say what the kind of the correct number of how big a sample should be in terms of doing kind of research. But I think I found that when I started this role within BT a few years ago, one of the biggest challenges I had actually was convincing the organization to move to this type of model, because BT's heritage as an engineering company means that, you know, we kind of want to build things as kind of robustly and as possible. So things like test and trialing, for example, would typically be something that we would do at the end of our process. So we developed a new product, we've taken it through the sort of the process to get it ready for launch, and only just as you're approaching launch would we then go out to customers and try the product. But what you're trialing, does the product work? Does it perform the way it's intended? What we've tried to do, certainly within my team, is kind of do that test and evaluation really early on before you go too far down that process, so that you're actually testing what the feedback is to the product way before you invest much money in kind of building it, really. And I think one of the things too that has worked in terms of getting momentum has been trying to look for sort of quick wins and kind of show that the power in kind of what you're doing, really. So I think you're always going to be you're always going to have people who are kind of naysayers and will use things like kind of sample size as a way not to get things done. But you need to, wherever possible, be pushing the kind of the art of the possible message. Okay, when you're getting with clients, how do you optimize getting them to come in with an open mind and thinking creatively themselves? I mean, I think there's it's, as I said earlier, I think customers often will quite happily take part in co-creation activities, because it gives them the feeling of contributing to kind of something. So bringing them in the tent sooner rather than later, I think, kind of tends to work quite well. And then in terms of thinking creatively themselves, I think there are tools and techniques. So I've almost had a complex about my lack of creativity. I mean, I'm married to a wonderfully creative woman who puts me to shame from that perspective and comes out with ideas like that. But what I have learned is that actually there are methods, tools that you can use to kind of stimulate that kind of creativity, and it's how you sort of manage that process that enables you to sort of do that. Okay. I'm a researcher, and in the early stages of the idea, qualitative research is best. Yeah, I think that is absolutely spot on, because if you start with some qualitative research, and as we sort of talked about here, where you may be talking to 2 or 3 customers to kind of help you with that. Yeah, I mean that is typically what we would do within BT as well. If you're starting to get to sort of narrowing down what the prop is going to be through that kind of early testing, and then if you really want kind of confidence, you could then move to sort of a more kind of quantitative based approach. But the issue is, I guess, as smaller companies, you may not have access to the same sort of market research budgets as some of the larger companies. So you've got to kind of work within the kind of constraints that you sort of work within, really. Okay. Thank you, John. Yeah, well, I worked in market research many years ago. Any more questions? Some good debate going on there. So as I say, please do kind of fill in the survey form if you haven't done already. There are, as I say, I think this is one of many that we're doing. So please do visit the bt.com /skills for tomorrow webpage to see what other courses and materials. I think these are clearly difficult times for everybody, really, very uncertain times. And the way I'm personally kind of dealing with it is, I look at some of the additional time this is giving me, particularly kind of at weekends. Which obviously some of that I spend with my family, but also try and use that to kind of learn new stuff. So I think it's brilliant that so many come on today, looking to kind of perhaps take something away that you can build into your kind of your day-to-day work. But as I say, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There is the team there have put up the feedback form so that we can keep improving these webinars for you. But if there's no more questions, I wish you all a very happy Friday and wonderful weekend. It looks like we've got some great weather approaching, which is fantastic. And yeah, we'll hopefully speak soon. Thank you.